to the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Fission radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear. Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission. Can you believe it? Today is November 11th, 2015. Today, Wednesdays are interview days where I interview activists and people in the community. And, I had planned on having Dana Durnford on the show this morning. I've been announcing it for the last week, I guess. I talked to him on Monday, and he was very nervous about coming on the radio show because he, excuse me, Ed?
Yes.
Could you
yes.
mute your phone for me?
Excuse me?
Would you mute your phone for me? I'm sorry, you guys, but you're making a lot of...
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't know I was giving you feedback. Hold on a second. I got to get the mute up here.
Well, let me introduce to you my friend Ed Osworth. I was going to give you the backstory, but since Ed made some noise, let me just get right to the interview. I had planned on interviewing Dana Durnford. We talked on Monday. He was very nervous about getting out in the public. We talked early in the morning. I guess that afternoon he talked to his family and had expressed that he wasn't going to do interviews. And they said, no, look, you should be out there. So he made a decision. And before he could call me back, he got a couple of offers to take some really good interviews. One of them conflicted with this time zone. So he did take it because we had canceled our interview. He and I have rescheduled for early December. So pursuant to that, I thought about who am I going to talk to now on this short interview day? And I thought, you know what, why don't I talk to my friend, Ed Osworth, who is an author. He's a retired real estate agent and an author. He wrote a book called Unstoppable Joy that's available on Amazon. He and I talk often about social engineering. In fact, he's one of my cohorts on developing my ideas. I bounce ideas off of him because I have been dumbfounded. Here's Dana, scared shitless to talk to me on Monday and really needs the encouragement of his family. Think about it. Dana Durnford, who I don't know if any of you are aware of this, and I'm going to give a brief background about it so people who don't know who Dana Durnford is will understand. I am part of a YouTube community that we call the Fuku Fighters, where we're trying to get the information out about the truth about Fukushima. Now, we all do it. We're all just independent citizens. Nobody's professionals. But we know each other through the YouTube community, and we support each other. Some of us gotten to know each other personally, talk through Skype. We're now doing phone conferences through Skype and posting them on YouTube. This is a critical issue. We're serious. We cannot ignore the nuclear and the technologists and their pollution on our planet. They are literally killing us. The fucking whales are washing up dead on the ocean. I mean, this is not a joke, folks. And when Dana Durnford has on his YouTube channel, Beautiful Girl by Dana, he has a live feed or had a live feed every day. And there was a community of 50, 60 people that would participate and communicate with each other, and probably several hundred, if not 1,000 people listening. I don't know the details on that. But Dana, actually, in Canada now, you think the Unpatriot Act is draconian. In Canada, they have some pretty arbitrary laws that they just passed called the C-51 laws. And they arrested Dana last week, and he was arrested for, well, what's the charge? Criminal harassment. Basically, the law says that if you publicly state that you're going to do some harm, or like I want to wring your neck, and that person feels personally threatened, like you might incite someone else to go do this to them, then they can have you arrested. And that's basically the sum of the charge. I kind of looked into it. And this is how I found out about the C-51 laws, because the laws in Canada are much different. They're not the same as in the United States. So anyways, we were nervous about him talking, and so he ended up going on the Rense show yesterday. You can find that also, Rense.com. He has a link for Dana Durnford's interview. It was really great. It was a great interview explaining everything. This morning he got a call from the John B. Wells show, the Caravan to Midnight. And I'm going to mention that other show because it's a great show. I like it. I mean, politically we're not exactly the same, but a lot of his ideas I think are correct. But anyways, he was interviewing Dana at this time. So Dana and I have tentatively rescheduled, depending on what happens in court in the next week or so, couple weeks. And then I won't give you the date because I'll tell you that by next week or the week after. We should know for sure. In the meantime, I contacted my friend Ed Osworth he is on Facebook if you want to get in touch with him. His name is Ed Oz, O-Z, in Lowell, Oregon. He lives up in Lowell. And he's kind of a philosopher, interesting person. He's had a very interesting background. But, you know, we can get into that on another day. I think we have a short time. I really want to explore this idea about the social engineering. So with all of that being said, I want to welcome you, Ed, formally to the radio show this morning. And I'm sorry about the noise factor, but it was just, I kind of needed to let you know about that. It was a little bit distracting. So,
okay, do I sound all right?
Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. So, is everything I said about you pretty much correct about the book? And is there anything else?
Yeah, that is fine. Thank you for having me on the show. And just wanted to add to the fact that basically I grew up in the world of Hollywood. I grew up in a movie family, so I've been very familiar with the world of illusion and influencing people because that's what I grew up in. And my interest in social programming actually goes back to about age 8 when I read a book that I highly recommend to everybody called The Hidden Persuaders by a man called Vance Packard. You can find that book on Amazon, and it's a very interesting book about how we are.
Say the name again. I'm going to write that down. Hidden Persuaders?
The Hidden Persuaders.
Who's it written by, Vance?
Vance, V-A-N-C-E, P-A-C-K-A-R-D.
Tackard.
And even though it was written in the 50s, it is still the most relevant book I've found on this particular subject of how we are manipulated through television, radio, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I know that you're the person that's talked to me about the peaceful atom. Ed was the first person who really showed me, and this was before I really was even aware of the Fukushima being out of control. When it happened, that's when the accident happened, Ed showed this to me. And, you know, I actually really did believe that the government story that everything was under control until May of 2012. So, I know I'm doing some catching up on all of this stuff, but, you know, with Dana having been arrested, Ed, this was like that. I mean, imagine that. It put the chill. In a way, it was serendipitous because it got him in front of an audience that is like, I don't know, 100,000 times larger than this one. But, I mean, he'll be back. He will be back. It's not like he just ditched me. We canceled it. But the point is this, you know, he's afraid to talk, and in Canada they have these laws just like in America they have laws. Like, we live in a country where we are being spied on, and we're like, going around our business like it's no big deal. And so,
Well,
would you
yeah,
just explain what social engineering is first?
Sure. The short version is social engineering is actually a discipline in science, and it refers to the efforts to influence popular attitudes and social behaviors on a mass scale, whether by governments, media, or private groups. And many times it's all of those together. The interesting thing about social engineering is when it started back with a man called Edward Bernays, who had worked for the Department of Public Information and promoted World War I, which basically had to be sold to the public.
He worked for the Department of Education. He was a government.
No, he worked for in World War I. He worked for what was called the U.S. Committee on Public Information, a powerful propaganda apparatus that was mobilized to package, advertise, and sell World War I to the American people.
Wow.
He was the guy who made up the slogan, "Make the world safe for democracy," as a matter of fact.
Wow.
He invented that slogan to sell World War I.
Wow.
And then what he outlined, the strategies he basically did, because you have to understand, back in World War I, the U.S. didn't want to get involved. We were isolationists.
Right, right.
The whole thing really was a hard sell to the public.
So what do you think when they invented the nuclear stuff, they decided like they were just going to, I mean, this is what I cannot get over. The lies of the nuclear industry. Like I'm looking at the people of St. Louis Airport, mind you. I've been to St. Louis Airport. It's big. Right next to the St. Louis Airport, there is a gigantic landfill that the government sold to a private industry and has just ignored and just still ignoring it to the point where the people, I understand why they're ignoring it because of the liability. If they acknowledge it, then all those people living near that landfill without any nuclear contamination or any pollution contamination, nuclear plus, this is just like pollution on Balco. It's right next to the landfill.
I agree, and I think everyone who's listening should go do a little research online regarding what's happening in St. Louis. And it's a repeat of disasters. As you know, my parents most likely died from a nuclear meltdown or 4 nuclear meltdowns that happened in Los Angeles that were kept a secret from the public for 35 years.
Right.
You know, I mean, and that was part of it. They were just starting the nuclear industry back then, and part of the social engineering was that they could not reveal to the public that the very first reactors ever made for nuclear power all failed and all had meltdowns. And that was, you know, they could not tell that to the public because if they had told that to the public in 58, we never would have had nuclear power.
This is the issue here. I'm reading on my YouTube channel this book, Poison Power, by John Goffman and Arthur Tamplin.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I've listened to you reading it.
In this book, he presses hearings. He copies hearings from hearings of Congress. Now, the book was written in 1971, so these hearings took place in 69, 70, right? And he wrote the book in 71. And in those hearings, there is someone from the Atomic Energy Commission stating unequivocally that if we bring the effluence is the emissions that you get, the liquid emissions that go into the wastewater that you get from the nuclear power plant, the effluence. Right now, if you go to the NRC, there's some decisions about their effluency level. How much are they going to let out into the world, right? The pollution.
Right.
So in this thing, the guy was saying to the Congress from the AEC that if we keep the effluence to a level that's 100% safe, inside the nuclear reactor, there's going to be too much contamination. It'll get too hot and it'll cause an explosion. So essentially, at this hearing, they said, we cannot do it safely. We have to pour it in order for nuclear power. So then he's the guy who wrote this. I think his name is Thompson. I don't know. I'm going to pull up the scientific study for Friday, actually. I was blown away last night. But they give the citing of the scientific journal where he actually says he's the guy who decided the risk level at 0.17 rad. 1 in 10,000 was safe, which is now much lower. But,
Right.
this is my question to you. Like, in thinking about this social engineering, do you know you cannot, on the mainstream media, if you're going to call about nuclear at all, you can't get through to anybody. They do not hear you. You cannot get through. And you can't get through to your congressman when you call them. And in fact, speaking
No.
of Congress people, let me interject right here because this is very important in regards to the St. Louis landfill fire. And I'm going to tell you, it's called the Westlake landfill fire. Westlake is 2 words, and people should be looking it up. You actually really ought to be looking it up because really these people need our support. And one of the things you can do, call your own senators of your own state, wherever you live, and then call Republican Roy Blunt of Missouri. His phone number, in Missouri has 2 senators, Roy Blunt and Claire McCaskill. This is the phone number. It is 202-224-5721, and that's Senator Roy Blunt. And also Senator Claire McCaskill. She's a Democrat, Senator Claire McCaskill. Her number is 202-224-6154. And you need to call them and say, you know what, based on all the information that we have found out publicly from disclosed documents, it is the responsibility of the NRC to take over this. Excuse me, Ed, could you be a little bit more quiet? Ed?
Sure, just a second. Let me mute here.
Okay. Okay, so, but this is the point about calling Roy Blunt and Claire McCaskill, is we need to call them so that we can support the people of Westlake. Because as I'm talking about the social engineering of people doing nothing, it occurs to me that I ought to encourage you to get out of that mode of doing things, which is why I'm talking about this with Ed. So, so back to this, Ed. I'm sorry to go off on a diatribe there on you about all of this, but I think this is part of the story. People just don't actively engage. They think it doesn't matter, so they do nothing. So what is?
They have been made to feel helpless about nearly all issues. That's, we're the populace has been molded into being spectators into what goes on rather than participants. You talk about the nuclear thing and how could these people gamble on that? And really, if you go back and have studied the Manhattan Project, several of the scientists did not want to even put off the first nuclear reaction because they thought it might destroy everything.
Well,
and they were overruled. They were overruled by the other scientists, and they basically gambled that it wouldn't destroy everything.
Well, that is really what it's about. Is they really believe. This is the hard part. This is the thing that's very. It feels like betrayal at this point because there's overwhelming evidence that radiation causes harm. The people in St. Louis are living with the results of it. The cancer results are off the charts. The different kinds of weird anomalies of cancers. There was in the interview, this gentleman was talking about the cancers they've seen is where people have had like weird tumors on their teeth, on the gums of their teeth, or they have appendicitis cancer, which is extremely rare, and they have a ton of them. I mean, it's overwhelming evidence that radiation is causing harm. And that this is directly left over. This is the first landfill site from the Manhattan Project. The Westlake landfill, Ed, is the first landfill of nuclear pollution, which frankly they didn't tell anybody about for 20 years. You know what I mean? They sold it and then they told us about it. It's like the deception is just beyond control. Yeah, I mean, What is that? I mean,
Well, I agree. I mean, the Santa Susana Field Lab meltdowns didn't come out for 35 years, and it makes one have to ask what is going on now that they aren't telling us about.
well, look, yeah, this is the point. It's about what I'm really interested in is how do they keep people from becoming engaged? Like when I start talking to people about St. Louis now, if they know about it, they get that Fukushima glaze in their eye. Do you know what I mean? Like it goes immediately now. People are immediately just shutting down. It's like I know they have been programmed, which is why I think this is an important topic to discuss because as we speak right now, Dana Durnford is interviewing with someone who is listening. He gets his message out to maybe 100,000 people right now. And he has to really tiptoe. And frankly, part of the reason he canceled with this show is he was so afraid he might say something. And he was just scared to death at the time I talked to him. His interview with Rent sounded pretty relaxed, although there was things when he said in there that, these are the draconian laws that we're living in. And this is the point of it all. Like, at what point are the masses of the people, like, we have these senators who could stop everything. They have the resources of the United States military to send in there to fix what's going on, whatever it means. There's 80 houses that probably need to be immediately evacuated in St. Louis. Immediately. That's what the citizens, this is what this, I heard this interview, I was on Lip TV 2. It's a YouTube channel. It's like a news radio show, just kind of like this one. And this guy was interviewing, and he said, "Look, the citizens there. If you can go to the Westlake landfill. Westlake is 2 words. Landfill Facebook group, and join that group. There's about 18. It started out with 2,000 or 3,000, 4,000 people. I joined it. When I joined it, there was almost 19,000 people. And I think the more people we can get on that page, because they do update it. Dawn, I forget her name. Dawn. I'll remember her name in a minute, but." There's a housewife. She started it all by herself, just her and a couple women, because they were freaked out. They found out about it. So this is the point here, though, Ed. How, in these studies of social engineering, how do you move people back into activism? Is it really just about community? Is this why they're breaking down the communities?
Well, I think it also is information overload. People get so much information, and this is deliberately done. People get so much information about so many issues every single day that it makes it easy for them to glaze over on an issue that involves something that is essentially invisible. I mean, it's not like, the burglar breaking in or somebody dumping poison in their stream, even though it is essentially the same thing, because it's radiation. They have been socially engineered to think all of these people that are building these reactors and the government, they are watching out for your safety. And the disconnect is amazing to me because the same people go to the dentist and sit down and have a half-inch lead jacket put on to have a relatively mild dental x-ray.
Right.
And they don't make the connection. That's invisible too, folks.
Well, I think what it is training us. It's kind of like this conversation, Ed. They're using this whole social programming to keep people. Like, I think the arrest of Dana Durnford, frankly, was to put a chill in the spine of people. The harassment of people on YouTube is to put a chill in your spine so that you just will not want to speak up because nobody wants to be ridiculed and publicly demeaned. And, they say these horrible things about, like, Dana got arrested. Well, Dana made I participated in most of those things that they cited. I don't know if it was that direct one. I could go back and look at the date, but it's gone now. He did take everything down. But there were times when he just, like, the tough guy syndrome, like, oh, I'm going to kill them, and they deserve to be strung up because they're fucking lying. That's just because, we're angry. People are angry at being, betrayed and lied to. Like, this is in fact why I think they continue to lie, because they're scared to death of what will happen if they start telling the truth. The liability of St. Louis could break think about this. The city of St. Louis, if the NRC was to really take charge of that and we started having real honest science, and we looked at every single nuclear power plant. This book that John Goffman wrote in 1971, basically, they stated to our Congress that, yes, we're going to have to pour nuclear pollution into every community where we build a nuclear power plant in order for this thing to provide us the energy that we want. At that time, they were projecting it was going to provide at least a third of the government's energy. A third. Now, we were willing to pollute our country for one-third power energy. Not even 50%, one-third. And frankly, it's way less than that now. And people are still, my sister lives near 3 nuclear power plants, and she is not actively engaged at all in shutting them down. And in fact, I saw a comment, this was an interesting comment on one of my YouTube readings. The guy said, look, no one has ever closed down a nuclear power plant with activism. It's always been in an emergency or a lack of funds or something like that, but activism is not going to work when, you guys are like, wasting your time here. That's that point, isn't it, Ed? Isn't that part of the social engineering? Like, don't worry.
Exactly. You can't, we can't do anything. And I think a big part of getting people active and getting people aware is Fukushima, in a way, has worked to the advantage of the nuclear industry, because that's something people can see. That's something that's dumping untold amounts of radiation into the ocean every day, and by the media and scientists kind of going, hey, it's no big deal.
Right.
That kind of reflects on every nuclear leak that's going on, and as you have told me, they're all over the country.
In fact, that is exactly what the licensees said at the NRC. Now, on November 19th is the deadline date for putting in your comments with the NRC about the hormesis theory. That's exactly what the licensees said. If you read their thing, they said, because of Fukushima, it has shown us that it's not that harmful. It's just not that harmful.
Incredible.
Maybe we're taking the wrong stance about this. Maybe we've accepted these old standards that radiation is really harmful for us, but it's not. And this is the interesting thing, is that a lot of people basically, in the back of their heads, that's what they're saying too. Every person who is not fucking freaked out about Fukushima, in the back of their head, accepts that theory, because otherwise they'd be like me and you on the radio at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday talking about the social engineering that keeps them silent while we have dead whales washing up on the coast, Oregon, and all up and down the West Coast. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, this is the thing that gets me. Like, fundamentally, like, the reason that my children say that I'm extreme, or that we're conspiracy theorists, or we're fearmongers, is because we refuse to acknowledge the propaganda. Because we're talking about scientific fact, when they have all agreed unconsciously that, yeah, radiation really, it was you, Ed. Explain the peaceful atom thing. This blew me away. Explain that to me. I could not.
What was that again? Explain what?
The peaceful atom.
Oh, you mean our friend the atom?
Yes, you were the first.
Well, that one part of the triumvirate of people that have programmed America, a big one is Walt Disney. And Walt Disney was literally given the job of selling atomic power to the United States of America. That was his job, and they gave him one of the paperclip nuclear engineers to work on his staff to help him with this project. And he created a brilliant film in 1956 called Our Friend the Atom, which was an hour presentation that explained how atomic power worked. Actually, the first half of the film was very good. College students still like it because it does a great job of explaining how atomic power works. But the other half of the film is it showed that our entire future was going to be atomic power, that there was no bad side effects. Nuclear waste is not mentioned once in this film. As a matter of fact, I encourage people to go watch this film to see what they had planned for nuclear power, like they were planning on putting radiation in our food, in our crops, in everything.
Right.
They thought radiation was the greatest thing on Earth back in the mid-50s. And when did you say they finally admitted nuclear power created toxic waste, Lonnie? Was it the 60s?
Yes, it was in the late 50s, and right before, this is why they sold the Westlake landfill. I think it was sold in 1962. That was the Manhattan Beach Project stuff. So, I mean, they sold it when they realized that, oh my God, they're the way I have the document actually. It was really shocking. Let me see if I can pull it up. But the document about the Westlake landfill is they talk about how if the waste is sold in an illegal manner, the responsibility automatically reverts back to the NRC to take it back and figure out how to manage it correctly. That's kind of the gist of the whole of what they say about it all, right? But this is why it is directly the NRC's point of view. And in fact, that's what people need to be saying to Senators Roy Blunt and Claire McCaskill, that it is the direct responsibility of the NRC to manage it, and we expect them to do it immediately. This is not something they can just do, on their decision. Oh well, we'll just do it when we feel like it. I mean, there are.
I think I'd like to emphasize to people who had just heard about the Westlake thing that the fire has been going on for how long, Lonnie?
Yeah. For a
5 years?
Time, yeah, a super long time. And
I mean, we're talking about a fire next to perhaps the most toxic nuclear waste dump in the USA that is now a quarter mile away from it.
Right.
And in 5 years, they have taken no action.
None. And they know, and now it's what, less than a quarter of a mile away from the nuclear dump site, the Manhattan Project nuclear dump site that, yes, was illegally dumped. Yes, they had some major problems there, but the bottom line is that it actually, honestly, it is the responsibility of the NRC, and there are families now in grave risk and people that feel betrayed, and it is time for our government to step up, and that's what we need to call and tell Claire McCaskill, Roy Blunt, and your own senators, that we need to actually get engaged in that one, because that is, I feel personally, it's the same thing about the social engineering. People are just like ignoring, in our country, I don't know, many of you share my feeling, but I look at Fukushima and I think, how could the people all over Japan just like give up on the people of Fukushima and allow the government to move them back into that area? Like, why aren't people rallying behind these people? Because from what I've understood people all over Japan believe they really believe that they're really convinced that the radiation just isn't that bad. I mean, the thing is, it is the kind of contaminant that we will not. It's not like if you're exposed to, say, some chemical waste or something, within a very small period of time, you start getting sick. You don't get sick 10, 15 years down the road. I mean, you don't get sick in 5 years. You get sick within a year or two of exposure. You start getting chronic illnesses like, in Georgia, when the Koch brothers destroyed most of the rivers in Georgia with their toxic slough from their processing plants and their paper plants, right? They destroyed many, many of the streams and many, many small communities all over Georgia. The people have chronic illnesses, respiratory diseases. And so that kind of thing, you see them, but what happens in those communities is it's not connected to the processing plants. It's the same 90%.
Well, I want to use my parents as a good example. They died 27 and 29 years after the exposure. There was no way they could have ever connected it in their minds.
Right. Well,
and they both got unusual rare cancers that were off the charts rare, and it just seems to me that and my brother at the same time got melanoma.
Right. Ed was actually born and raised in Los Angeles, which is right next to Chatsworth, which is where the very first nuclear power plant melted down, and they left the decision of what to do with the radiation up to an 18-year-old, and he decided to let it go out into the community. Otherwise, they'd have a big explosion. So he let it off into the community, and the government really kept that secret. Here again, we go with the secrecy, with the government keeping it secret that we had a nuclear meltdown in Chatsworth, California. And now it's come out. Ed told me about it about a year ago. There was a big expose recently in a magazine about the nuclear meltdown that happened in Chatsworth. This again, Ed, this is all about the social engineering of teaching us to be quiet about the harm that's being done to us. And like, even all of our neighbors, this is what's really pounding me like a big wave today, is that everybody who is not actively engaged, and even those that are actively engaged, like, this is interesting. On Nukes Northwest Facebook page, she posted some things. This is the hard part for me. We are out there trying to reach out and make a difference and let people know about the harm that's being caused. And our own government is denying the harm. Mimi Gurman said, because the people in St. Louis are expressing severe anxiety and betrayal on their Facebook page, the Westlake landfill. People that comment there are it ranges from anger to betrayal to sadness to guilt, like they should have known. That's kind of, I spent some time in that pool for a little while. Like, I live right next to San Onofre. I thought it was an observatory. I should have known. I should have been more responsible as an adult to figure out what are these military. If I would have looked into what was this military outlet, I would have discovered it was a nuclear power plant, but I didn't. And it's that same kind of guilt. And so Mimi Gurman said, look, you know what? We've all been working at this, and we all keep getting ignored. No matter what we do, they have convinced the people who make decisions that radioactivity is safe in the face of astounding medical evidence, which they just summarily ignore. It's the 90% rule. So,
well, I think, you said earlier, early on in the show, I think you hit the nail on the head when you brought up the liability issue. The truth is that, I believe, is behind all of this official denial, because there is liability beyond comprehension here. And something I'd like to point out to people, which goes right into social engineering. Most people are not aware of the fact that the big proponent of nuclear engineering and the builder of many, many of the nuclear plants, and the engineer of Fukushima, as a matter of fact, is General Electric. And General Electric owns over 25% of the media in the United States.
Right.
So if you really expect the media to get on a big investigatory thing of how liable and how toxic this stuff is, it's not going to happen.
Right.
Because General Electric owns the news stations, and it keeps getting narrower and narrower and narrower to the point where last week National Geographic was sold to Murdoch.
Yeah, he'll do that.
That's why you need to go on. You need to go on YouTube. You need to go on Facebook. I mean, you did a great post yesterday about, I'm on Facebook for the same reason you are, because I can talk to people. I can make them aware of issues. It's not really so much social media for me as a news outlet.
Yeah, but you know what? Again, let's get back to the social engineering. This is the anxiety. See, this is the fear-based society that they are creating. This is why I say happiness is resistance. I know, as a person who speaks out against the nuclear industry and about the harm the nuclear industry is causing, and basically, they haven't lied. Like, they did testify to Congress and said, we can't have nuclear power unless we poison the community. And it was the Congress who said, okay, we'll let you poison the community. Congress could have shut it down, but no, they went ahead with it. So that's a second conversation. But being on Facebook, now we live fast forward 50, 60 years in the Age of Fission and the new the neo-fascism that we live in now. We know for a fact that they are taking names and counting heads on Facebook. They know what you're saying, who you're saying it to. They can control actually who you are reaching. And so that you're just sort of like talking to a smaller and smaller group if they want you to. This is part of the social engineering because we as a people are sitting down twiddling our thumbs excuse me, while Chelsea Manning is sitting in prison rotting for no reason other than outing the murder of some innocent people. Now, that's not the America that I believe we are. I was listening to the hearings on C-SPAN yesterday, Ed, about Guantanamo. These were not hearings. This was I think it was a world, it has to do with the UN. It's an oversight committee of Guantanamo, basically. It's a committee to recommendations to shut down Guantanamo because the international community is fed up. They're not going to take it. So they have written a letter to the United States and said, you need to close Gitmo. You need to get rid of certain of these people, and you need to do it. Otherwise, we are going to charge you guys with war crimes. I mean, this is just, and what they're actually saying on this thing that I saw yesterday, this report says they want people held accountable. They want the torturers held accountable, the people who tortured. Some people went beyond even the known aggressive interrogation. They want those people held accountable, and they also want that place emptied. And it is a really serious thing. This is why Obama, no doubt, is moving to close Guantanamo before he leaves office, because I think he could, him and Bush could be charged with war crimes. That shit is bad. You know what I mean? Like, they really could be. And this is again, the social engineering, we don't even hear about this. That did not even make the news. Just like...
Well, no, you're absolutely right. And I mean, and as far as, I got to make a comment here on nuclear, because a lot of people, because of social engineering, they think of nuclear power plants as these very sophisticated and incredible ways of making electricity, the way they've been sold. But the truth is, folks, all a nuclear plant is a pot to boil water in.
True.
We are toxifying the earth to do the simplest technology in the world, to boil a pot of water and make steam. And that is why it is completely unnecessary.
Completely. But I think that it's the idea of the liability, and it's the social, they are pushing this agenda of letting people we're like frogs in a pot of boiling water. This is the issue here. So, I mean, I go back and forth whether I gave out a pretty impassioned little diatribe there about calling our senators. But on the other hand, I recognize it. It's, like Mimi Gurman says, they have been pushing back. She's been actively engaged as an anti-nuke activist for a long time. And this is where Kevin Blanche loses his guts, man. This is where he starts spilling out cuss words and gets pissed off and starts calling people names. Because people have made a living for the last 20, 30 years being well paid, like Kevin Camps goes on the television and says, a microscopic amount of radiation has gone into the Pacific Ocean from Fukushima, a microscopic amount. Now, that's exactly what he said on Tom Hartman's show. And I think the reason he says that, I understand why they say it, because they don't want to be deemed nuts and lunatics. He's trying to ease into the idea. It's kind of like Dana did not show people pictures of the before pictures of his expedition up the coast. Dana Durnford went on a 5-month journey, or 5.5, maybe 6-month journey up and down the coast of British Columbia, taking pictures of the coast and documenting the lack of life there. He used to be a diver, and he has tons of pictures. And we used to say to him, email him, I did this even myself, why aren't you posting the before pictures? And he was like, it's too shocking, I can't do it. And now that he got arrested, he's starting to show the before pictures. It is shocking. You should see the lack of life. Like, most of us don't know what the Canadian coastline looked like prior to Fukushima. All we've seen is his photographs. But you cannot believe it, the lack of color, the lack of life, it is dead. The Pacific is dead. Like, up along that coast, there was very little life. And this is why, again, Ed, so how do we overcome, in your study of social engineering, what is the remedy I believe that we need to learn EFT or meditation or some other form of reprogramming our own brain. Like this, I'm going to have on my radio show, I'm hoping in the next month, Brad Yates. I wrote to Brad Yates, who is an EFT teacher that I found on YouTube. He has a bradyates.com. He's a known speaker and a paid professional tapping instructor. That's the nickname we call EFT, because you tap on your own head. But it is basically a reprogramming of things. And what do you think? What do you think is the way to overcome the social programming? We've got about maybe 10 minutes left here.
Well, social programming basically comes every direction it comes to you at, through media, through news, through education. Most of it is actually a distraction. I'm kind of with you. I'm a very optimistic person, and I don't, foresee the end of the world. Although we may lose the majority of the population, we're going to go on as a people. And I think what people really need to start doing is they start tuning into their heart, tuning into their intuition, because that is what allowed this stuff to happen, is people turning away from their heart.
Amen.
And turning away from their intuition.
Conscience. That's what Ackerman says. It's your conscience. You know what's the right thing to do. Listen to your gut. We all know what's the right. It's exactly why, like when I first got engaged in this, I contacted Kevin Blanch and said, hey, can you come here? But you know what? I was still too timid to speak out publicly. So for a really long time, I sponsored Kevin. We incorporated the Post-Ignorance Project. We got the thing off the ground. I was perfectly happy having him go out there because I was very afraid, frankly. After I had my experience with being investigated by the Capitol Police, I really was not interested in being a public figure again. And then I guess after 2 years of watching, with Kevin doing his best, going out there to place after place after place, people saying they would show up and nobody showed up, it really made me realize it is about social programming, because fundamentally people they're afraid, or else they unconsciously agree. I'm at a loss. Like, how do we, my goal here with this is for me to figure out and learn how to help people. How do we shake it? The people, the movers and shakers, the people who make decisions, how do we help them change their minds? Because we really need the military and we need our government to spend big money on these issues, because it is they created the Manhattan Project. It's their mess. The nuclear issue is a gigantic, we cannot just ignore it. They can deny that radiation causes harm, but guess what? Radiation will not deny the harm. It will cause you. It is causing you. It is going to do harm, and they can deny that it's causing harm, but that doesn't change the facts.
Well, let's get back to intuition. I mean, if in the 1955 a scientist came up to you and said, hey, I found this great way to boil water, but it's going to create toxic stuff that's going to last for 30,000 years, what would your intuition have told you?
Hell no.
Exactly. That's what anybody's intuition would have told them. But you've been involved with it because you've read the John Goffman stuff. You've seen the way they twisted their minds around to justify this.
Yeah, and actually, that's part of the deception, is to not tell us about the nuclear waste until they've had 20 years of social engineering. They did, we really didn't understand about the waste problem until after My Friend the Atom.
Exactly. I mean, it's like the film.
Say the title of that film again, My Friend the Atom.
It's available on YouTube, thank goodness, so anyone can go see it. It's called My Friend the Atom, and it's by Walt Disney. It was shown on The Wonderful World of Disney every single year for probably 15 years.
I remember seeing it as a little kid.
And it used the analogy of the atom. Some folks might remember it from this. It used the analogy of atomic power being the genie, either the evil genie or the good genie. Because after Hiroshima, atomic power was a tough sell, and that's why they gave it the best salesman in America, Walt Disney.
Huh. So, but why do you think that they pursued it? Because they knew they could use it for outer space use? You think that's why?
I will tell you exactly, and I'm going to read you a quote from Edward Bernays that will out of his book Propaganda that explains their mindset. Quote, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country." Let that quote sink in. They think it's good for democracy.
Uh-huh. They think it's good for democracy. They get to help us choose. That's why we...
Yes, well, the title of Edward Bernays' second book is scarier than hell, and it's why we are in the mess we in. His second book was titled The Engineering of Consent.
The engineering, and what does he talk about in that book? The engineering of consent?
Of consent, getting the public to consent to, say, nuclear power.
Or
it has to be engineered.
Or being spied on, Ed. Like, consider this.
Right.
Every conversation that we have, this is why the Europeans are turning away from the American government. They are building their own internet networks, and we are not going to be included to their party. We are not going to be invited. They are going to exclude the United States from everything. They are building a wall, and whether the United States wants to admit it or not, the CIA has undermined our democracy through the use of spying and just their underhanded, bullyism that they got going on. I mean, it's really undermined everything. This nuclear thing is exactly where, this whole thing about hiding the harm, our Congress really, seriously, when you have somebody from an industry that sits before you and says, if we keep the levels of pollution at a safe standard, we can't use it. So we have to pollute the country in order to have the energy. Who would make that decision? This is, again...
Well, Lonnie, I don't want to interrupt, but I think it's important to point out, because we haven't mentioned it in this particular conversation, that nuclear power and nuclear weapons are both in the same bed.
Yes.
Can't have one without the other.
Well, that's the reason for the nuclear power, isn't it? Don't they get what they need to make nuclear weapons out of nuclear power plants? Yes.
Absolutely, and folks, if you don't believe me, that's the reason why every time some foreign nation develops a nuclear power plant, the United States goes apeshit. Because that nuclear plant gives them the ability to produce the raw material to make nuclear weapons.
Well, but then again, this is the whole thing, Ed. Again, on the social engineering thing, what makes that acceptable? What makes that acceptable to the people that are our elected officials? This is where I want to root this out. Who in their right mind would say that that's an acceptable, a viable option to have nuclear weapons? Like, why in the world... When we see the devastation of the 2 nuclear weapons that we officially dropped in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, when we saw what happened and what we did in the testings all throughout the 50s and the early 60s before they stopped it, why on our flat Earth do we even need nuclear weapons? Like, why do we need that? This is my questioning. Like, right now, I saw an article this morning that basically said that the whole conversation about Russia being a threat to the United States is an excuse for us to ramp up our nuclear warheads. Like,
exactly. They just approved another long-range bomber.
Right.
That's going to cost $80 billion or some, and who knows, $1 trillion probably. I mean, it's because, they're still acting like we're back in the wars in the 1950s where we're going to drop nuclear bombs on each other. And it's completely unacceptable. And the truth is, we already got 5,200 nuclear weapons?
You know what? Speaking of all of that today, Ed, today is Veterans Day, isn't it?
Oh, that's right.
So I want to thank the veterans for having gone and really, the people out there that really believed that they were doing something good, they really went, and I think many veterans still believe that they did some good. Many veterans are bitter about it. But the fact is, these are people who at least did what they said that they believed in and stuck up and did what they had to do. And that's the reality. That's why I really love veterans, because they're people who walk the walk. They did what they said they believed in. They put their lives
I agree. I agree with you. I'm totally thankful, Professor.
Yeah, it's not about whatever war they got thrown into, because frankly, the wars that we've had, in my view, have not been about the ideals that we were sold them on. And I think that's kind of again, social engineering of the whole idea of what it is that causes us to ignore the bigger picture of it all. And so,
well, and as we're talking about veterans and social engineering, I mean, again, you're talking about a huge sleeping giant. Look at what they're doing to the veterans. They should put a stop to what's being done to them.
That's true. The betrayal is so outrageous. The fact that we have any homeless veterans is an outrage. Every single vet ought not to be homeless. Every single vet ought to have their issues. I mean, we need to give them extra help and not, the Republican plan is to have them just be able to go to personal hospitals for free and use personal insurance for free. But the problem is when you go to private funded health care, the people that own those institutions have a vested interest in denying care. Whereas the Veterans Administration, they can't deny you care. They won't say you don't need it. From what I've understood, the few veterans that I know are glad to have the Veterans Administration. So I wanted to say before we end, we have about 2 minutes left, maybe 3 minutes. I really did want to bring that up about the veterans. It was an oversight on my part. But again, the whole thing about us immortalizing war, the dirty little secret about war is that it sucks, is that it's not a good idea. And the idea that we need to have more nuclear weapons so that we can protect ourselves from God knows what attack. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just such a flaming liberal, but I honestly don't believe that we need to have more weapons and more war. And I think that we need to move back towards talking about love and peace. And I think you were right, Ed. We need to walk on our intuition. We need to really do what we think is right. This is what got me going when you said that, because the veterans did what they thought was right. They listened to their intuition. And so
exactly.
If we all listen to our own intuition, now, whether that worked out for them personally or not, that's up to them. Just like us, it doesn't always work out, but we have to do what we believe is the right thing. And be studious students of life. Don't, make an effort to study and figure it out and understand what it is that doesn't feel right. Just because we don't understand a topic doesn't mean we can't learn about it. I've learned a lot about the pollution, nuclear pollution, just because of Fukushima. I had to wake up and I started asking questions. And I'm still, to be honest, as an activist, I mean, I don't actually consider myself an activist. I consider it my duty as a human being. I don't consider what I do as activism. So
I agree with you. It's all of our duty to speak up about this stuff because it's our children, it's our grandchildren, it's every generation to come.
It's every plant, it's every animal on this planet. So we've got 45 seconds left. Ed, is there anything that you wanted to get in on this conversation in 30 seconds?
Well, as I said, I would encourage people to look up Edward Bernays online and read one of his books, or at least read some quotes to see where all of this stuff started. And thank you so much for having me on today.
Yeah, Ed, I really appreciate your time and your consideration and your conversation, because it does help. And I encourage everybody to put your courage feet on, put your thinking cap on, and they are not used to an educated populace, but guess what? The uneducatedness is a thing of the past. We will get some justice for all of us. So put your courage feet on. Take care, you guys.